Good morning, Western Hills and friends. I appreciate, first of all, having the opportunity to sit down at the breakfast table and talk to y'all this morning and just bring some thoughts. Welcome to our home. If you were here, I would try to have coffee and donuts, but I'm going to forego that this morning. I'm not even going to have any coffee. I hate to say it, but I want this to be done. I want to get my thoughts out, and I'm happy doing it. See that smile? I'm happy. But all week long, I've been hearing about different events of the week with the COVID-19 virus, and I've heard everything from being a tragic week to all of a sudden maybe not too bad, having high losses, to maybe they won't be as bad as we thought. Maybe we haven't hit the apex yet, but then some say we might be headed just past the apex in some locations. We hear so many things from the news that, quite honestly, it's hard to believe all of it. And I just have to kind of push myself away and say, I think it's time for me to refresh. And the only way I can refresh is through prayer and asking God to help me to kind of work through this. This week also leads us up to one of the biggest events to take place in the last 2,000 years. It was an awesome occasion. He came, instead of riding in on a horse as a leader and a warrior, he came in on a donkey. And that was so unusual. It was throwing everybody into a whirl. But, it just showed that Jesus was real. He was a real person, just like you and me. All he wanted to do was have fellowship with his people and to bring them closer to a knowledge of God. That was his lot in life. But he also had some weaknesses. Just like we do. It tells us in the Bible, in fact, I will read that for you. For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with feelings or infirmities, but was in all points tempted like we are, and yet without sin. So that tells us he was just like us. He was tempted all the time. But you know what? Jesus was way above all that. And even though he was tempted, he didn't accept those temptations. When you think about that, you feel so inferior. Because I can tell you, every day I do something and I have to ask God to forgive me for just some simple, stupid thing. But he was our high priest and is able to understand our weaknesses. He was tempted in every way, as I said before, but he did not sin. We should feel very sure that we cannot come before God's throne where there is grace. We can come before the throne all day long, anytime we want, because God gives us grace. He knows what's happened in our life before we ever say anything. But the fact that we can confess it to him and ask forgiveness, he does. And that is in itself miracles. We can receive mercy and grace to help us when we need it. In Hebrews 4:15 and 16, in fact, I just read 15, I'll read 16. Let us therefore come boldly into the throne of grace that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in times of need. Now, Now that should be comforting to everybody that's listening. In spite of this lofty position that Jesus had, Jesus was willing to for a time to forego the privileges of deity and to enter humanity. He was born just like all babies are born. I mean, there wasn't, well, the fact that he didn't have a room, he was in a stable, but just in general, pretty much babies were born in pretty rough conditions back then. His childhood was a common one. It tells us in the Bible that Jesus, in Luke, that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. There's no evidence or suggestions that he was spared the inconvenience of adolescence. You know, I guess that really when it comes right down to it, nobody's spared that, and we all go through it. As an adult, he was weary enough to sit down as well at the well. In John 4:6. And, you know, when he was tired. He'd been walking all day long. That's the only way he'd get it. And walking in a pair of sandals ain't much arch support or anything else. And he got sleepy and dozed off on a rocky boat. Now that's easy to do. I could get in a boat, sit down, lay back, and just the waves or the water itself, I'd be asleep in a minute. That's probably why I'm not a very good fisherman. He became hungry in the wilderness and thirsty on the cross. We all get hungry. We all, get thirsty. When the soldiers pounded the nails through his skin, 1,000 nerve endings cried for relief. Now, think about it. They didn't really nail it through the palm of his hand, but they nailed it through his wrist structure. And that was so it wouldn't tear, that it would hold together. How the pain must have been excruciating. How did he stand it? As he hung limp on the cross, 2 human lungs begged for oxygen, because the whole intent of everything was that the individual would suffocate and die. When, we find out in John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Does this promise matter? If you ever wonder if God understands you, it does. If you ever wonder if God listens, it does. If you ever wonder if the Creator can, in 1,000,000 years, comprehend the challenges you face when pondered long and hard the promise of the incarnation. Sorry, I got a little tongue-tied right there. I guess this is my first rodeo. Jesus is able to understand our weakness. In Hebrews 4:15, it tells us that. I read that earlier. The one who hears our prayer understands your pain. He never shrugs or scoffs or dismisses physical struggle. He had a human body. Let me ask you something. Are you troubled in spirit? He was. John 12:27. Let me read that for us. Now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this cause came I unto this hour. So he did, his spirit was troubled. He prayed to the Father and said, if it can pass from me, let it be. But also, he said, let me do the will of my Father. Are you so anxious you could die? He was too. In Matthew 38, then saith he unto them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry here, ye here, and watch with me. So, he was anxious. Are you overwhelmed with grief? He was too. In John 11:35, shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. So he did cry tears. Have you ever prayed with loud cries and tears? And this in Hebrews 5:7, and I'll read that. Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayer and supplication and strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard, in that he feared. Jesus had all the things that we fear. I don't know if you've ever been to that point that you cried out with tears and anguish because you needed God's help so bad and wanted it, and felt like you were standing alone. He felt that way too. There's no reason to be ashamed or not tell people, because that's the whole thing about Christianity, that we can come together as one and strengthen up the brothers and the sisters together and pray for them. That's the most important power product that we have. We can pray, and we do it well at Western Hills. But you know what? The thing is, we sit here and wonder if he understands that. He gets you. I mean, that's the bottom line. It was the week before Jesus died, a week of him sharing his final thoughts and goodbyes. 1 week of telling his disciples, I love you, one last time. It was a week filled with pain and promise, leading up to one final agonizing proclamation. It is finished. They didn't kill Jesus. Jesus gave up his life. And we all need to remember that. With one breath, Jesus became our final sacrifice. And because of his power over death, we can now become wholly alive. This Holy Week, set aside time each day leading up to Easter, reflecting on what Jesus' sacrifice means to you. I want to thank you for spending some time with us this morning as we reflect on what Easter means to us. Have a blessed day.